Well, hello, and welcome to another THRIVEcast. I am your host, DJ Eshelman, and yeah, I'm happy to be with you today. Honestly, this is going to be an interesting day, mostly because, unfortunately, we've had this weird circumstance where both my co-host and our guest had things come up today, which were very unfortunate. So, unfortunately for you, well, maybe not unfortunately, but whatever. I'll be alone today, but hey, if you're here with me and you have a question or a comment, go ahead and put that into the comment section there, and we'll see it pop here in about 20 seconds or so. A little bit delay when it comes to the YouTube stream today, but hey, we're going to do our best. So today, first of all, I wanted to thank the affiliate that we have for today. Just a full disclosure here, anytime you click on this link, we do get a kickback, but it's a great way to support our channel. Fortunately, though, for you, something that doesn't cost you anything more, and that is what I use on a daily basis here in the studio when I'm on calls, when I'm doing this broadcast, various things like that. And demonstrated this last week. The vendor is Crisp, K-R-I-S-P. You can go find out more about them by clicking on the link there. We'll put it in the description as well, but it's thrive-it.com/crisp. And that is a great way to not only support this channel, but the technology is really cool. So basically what it does is it is using AI to determine what voice should sound like. Here's the challenge. So something like me, you can see, if you're on the video with me here, you can see that I use a very high-end microphone to do these broadcasts. I have equipment here that has a technology called a noise gate. Now, the noise gate is really good about taking out signal when it's below a threshold, so you don't just have noise on the line. It's something I've been using in live performances for years and things like that. It's a very useful tool. But the problem is it's a gate. So once the gate is open, then any noise that's coming on in the background is still coming through. So if your voice is loud enough to trigger the gate and there's also noise in the background, then that is a challenge. And so that is why Crisp is really cool, because it can actually still, even though the gate is open, it's still able to take out that noise and only have your voice come through. It's just simply amazing technology. You can try it for free right there on that link. So I encourage you to do so. So today we are going to be talking about, should I become a consultant? This is a question I get every now and then when it comes to coaching and things like that. But it's something that honestly I might even write a book about soon. But we'll see how that goes. I guess it's going to depend on what kind of interest there is in the topic. But I became an independent consultant a few years ago, almost 10 years ago now, actually. And technically, that's not true. Technically, I became an independent consultant pretty much right out of college. I started working for a company and over Y2K, and as more of an internship. And then right after that, I was asked to stay on as a contractor to go visit these vessels out on the ocean, that sort of thing. Actually, they're in port, but you know what I mean. They're ocean vessels, and so working on their IT systems. And so that was my first experience as a consultant. And so I've learned a lot over the years as far as what works, what doesn't, and that sort of thing. So I thought I'd maybe start off the conversation with what kind of things kind of should indicate to you that maybe you should be becoming a consultant, and then we'll go from there as far as what kind of strategies and what kind of approach to take. So the first thing to consider if you're looking at being a consultant is why. You always want to start with why. And there's a lot of things about being a consultant that are really cool. I would say for me, the best thing about being a consultant in my mind is being able to say a very magic word, and that word is no. And I say it kind of like that these days because there's a joy in saying no. But a lot of people that are hearing this, I know, will probably be in that place of not being able to picture saying no to work. In fact, you're probably in a place where you are picturing that, you're desperate for any work you can get. And so saying no to something doesn't even sound like even a possibility. But the thing about being a consultant is that if you can do it right, you can make it so that you have enough income stored up from previous work that you don't have to take work unless you want to. That can make you much more strategic over the years. So that is a goal to shoot for. Now, it's not going to be like that out of the gate. I can pretty much guarantee it. Very rarely is that a reality just coming right off of working traditionally. It's just not realistic. But like I said, it's a goal to shoot for. Some people, like myself, really want to work on other things and not just do consulting all the time. And so when it comes to things like writing books, this gives me the flexibility to do that. And so there's some I guess room to do that more effectively. And so that's a good thing as far as being able to actually have the time to do that. But it gives some balance too, because you're still making money in the midst of doing that, and so it's not impossible. And so yeah, there's a lot of things about that are kind of awesome in that regards. Some people, honestly, might be in a phase of their lives where they've worked up to a level of comfort where they just want to be able to take some time off and do some things with their life, that sort of thing. That's a real possibility. And yeah, cool. So sorry, things popping up. It happens. So anyway, as far as being a consultant, yeah, it's a lot of opportunities there. I've done a lot of travel, a lot of travel, so much so that I would say that that's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to doing less consulting work these days, is because there's been so much travel involved in my life lately. Not so much, but traveling for different things, maybe. But the thing about it is that I've been able to gain perspectives from people all across the country and even in various parts of the world, which has been a great thing. This is actually the reason why we're doing all this, is coming out of years and years of traveling and talking to people and seeing their struggles and seeing commonalities and just various things that people deal with all the time, that you're probably dealing with all the time. And these are things that I'm seeing as patterns. And so that was my vision for this. Having seen that, it's sort of like the if you say something kind of thing. That's what it's been like for me, having all these years of observations and consulting, saying, what, I can't just let this go. I've got to do some things to encourage people. The other thing about this that I'll say before we get into the kind of the mechanics of this is that I feel very strongly that we are entering into a period where we're going to see more people doing independent consulting, or at least contract consulting. I'll get into the distinctions there in a minute. But the thing is, if you're working for someone right now, if you have a job, a full-time job, you're not as secure as you think. I hate to break it to you, but the reality is you probably don't realize just how vulnerable you can be as far as that goes. So, I hate being like that, but let's be honest. We're in some weird times right now, and we faced some times like this before. Actually, it's hard to remember sometimes, but back in 2008, 2009, we went through a similar thing when it comes to the technology world, especially, and that bird flu at the time made people question whether they should be going to work and that sort of thing. And so we found a lot of reasons to work from home and things like that. Well, what happened also was not only an economic shift at the time with the crash of 2008 and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of people said, well, gosh, do we really need the employees here all the time? Probably not. The next iteration of that was, do we really need employees? And so you started to see this emergence of this thought of, don't own stuff and don't own staff. And so in the IT world, what you're start to see is much more project-based work and a lot less of just staff-based work. In fact, a lot of IT teams that I was encountering when I was on the road with Citrix Consulting were a lot of the times I was just supplementing a project team that they weren't even going to be the ones that were supporting the long-term work. Other people were going to be doing that. I was just there to help them implement, and their team just implemented technologies. That's what they did. So they never actually supported their own technologies. It was kind of ahead of its time for a lot of the places that I saw that. But it's a model that actually, from a financial standpoint, actually makes a bit of sense. Now, here's the crazy thing about this: your company, if you're full time right now, is spending what you earn, what you have in your paycheck in your hand at the end of the week or end of the month or whatever. Your company's spending about twice that to keep you on board. Let that sink in for a minute. The company, through a series of taxes and benefits and expenses, HR, insurance, all these kind of things are all forming together to make this big ball of expense, to where it literally costs twice the amount of salary that you're earning to keep you on as an employee. Now, in volatile times, what happens with that is that gets under the microscope. It's like, is that really worth it? It might not be long-term sustainable. And so they look at ways to see if that's work that they could outsource, or see if that's work that has more of a temporary nature to it, sort of like a project kind of a thing. And that's where calling in a consultant usually comes into play. Now, consultants have various kind of connotations with it, I guess you could say, as far as that goes. Like, some consultants are considered, like the Bobs is a classic example from the movie Office Space. You have productivity consultants, or things like that are coming in to look at a process and give advice. That is a form of consulting. I've done a lot of that in terms of what I've done with vendors, partners, resellers, that sort of thing. And as far as coming around and making design suggestions and saying, okay, based on what you need, here is what you should configure. And I may not be the one doing it. I may be saying, here is the prescription. Here's a description of what to do, as far as what actions to take, or a lot of times specifically, like, here's the way this aligns with the leading practices at the time. And I apologize if you're watching this live. We're apparently getting some weird stuff, but if you're on the recording, hopefully that doesn't affect anything. But hey, this is just the reality of this kind of stuff these days, folks. I think we're all probably used to it. But anyway, that's moving on. So the other part about this is that your employer wants to spend less on projects, obviously, especially like I said, in volatile times where they're not really sure about 100% of income coming in all the time. It's a lot of times that's just a reality. And so if they can be in a position to where, I hate to say like expendable, but in a way that actually is a bit desirable. And let me tell you why. If you can take on that risk of being quote unquote expendable and that sort of thing, there's an expected boost that they're going to be giving you. In other words, any company that's hiring consultants or contractors even knows that they can't just pay you what you're being made, what you're making right now. I mean, I'm talking like before taxes even. They know that they have to pay you more for you to take on the risk of maybe not having work after this contract is done, or maybe even having to sever the contract midway through. And so that is something where that's a reality that you might face. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the pitfalls as we get towards the more towards the bottom of the hour. But just know that you can make a lot of money doing consulting work, especially if you're really smart about it and kind of balance out your risks. It's a much more advanced kind of strategy, but that's something I have done in my life. Is I have kind of built a portfolio of different work I'm doing, and so I'm not necessarily doing just one job at a time. A lot of times I'll be working on multiple things at the same time and that sort of thing. And there's ways to build in a bit of diversity diversity in your work to allow yourself, more time to do what you want. For example, I'm down to roughly about 15, 10 to 15 hours a week of actual consulting work that I'm doing, and that's because I'm having other things that I'm doing. Now, I might be working 12-hour days, but I'm uh, kind of doing some things that are uh, kind of more passive in their regards. I mean, you're seeing the books behind me, if I can point correctly. There we go. That's something that is do the effort once, and then it just goes over time. It's not like a big payday or anything like that. It's more of just a thing you build into your portfolio and things like that. So that's a more advanced strategy, getting way ahead of myself. But anyway, as far as it goes, you will make more per hour as a consultant. If you're not making more per hour as a consultant, find a new contract, is the way that goes. In fact, you are losing money that way, because there are some things you have to consider as far as taxes and things like that. If you are independent in any kind of way, whether it be as a contractor or as a full independent consultant, there are expenses you need to consider that you haven't done before. So that's something we're going to talk about as well. But there is another option for being a contractor a consultant that people don't always consider, and that is working with a partner or with a vendor. A lot of times they will have consulting teams that they have as employees. And there's various reasons they do that. A lot of times they'll have employees as contractors because they want to kind of have a standard banner that they have, or a standard practice that they have. And it's easier to maintain that as employees. It's also easier to maintain what we call a talent bench if you have employees. And so you can respond more rapidly to requests for work if you have a bench of people that are ready to work. And so it's a risk they're taking. Obviously, like I said, they're taking on the risk, but this is something where a lot of companies do this now, where they will have their own consulting teams. I spent 10 years working with Citrix. Now, I was not a direct employee of Citrix. I was a contract employee. So a little bit of a different relationship. In fact, in my case, is even more complicated things with that too. There's levels to the complexity there. It's a much more advanced topic we can get into. If somebody has a question, maybe we can do that. But honestly, the reality is that vendors like Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, any of the attached software vendors, like your Control Ups or your EG Innovations, all these kind of attached storage, hyper converged like Nutanix. I can go on and on. iGel. All these people have teams that work with them as consultants, and they are there to help the customer implement what they've bought or get more value out of what they've bought. So it makes a lot of sense. And so they are always going to be looking for people as consultants. And so if you feel that that's something you want to pursue, that's an option. So now that we've kind of established that there's a lot of various things you can do, let's talk about that, like whether you should be a employee as a contractor, employee as a consultant, contractor, where you're actually just under a 1099 contract with a company, but you're fulfilling someone else's statement of work, basically, or be fully independent as a consultant. And there's pros and cons to each of these. But a lot of these have some similarities in that if you are the type of person that is not really, you don't prefer a cubicle, that you would much rather be out and about in the world, then you are a good candidate for pretty much any of these, but more so as an employee contractor employee consultant or a contractor consultant. Independent, kind of, you end up with a blend, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But most companies, at least especially before the whole coronavirus COVID-19 thing happened, were on the road a lot more. And so this is a dynamic that's changing, but I think it'll come back around eventually. But the reality is that a lot of the work that was being done by consultants of companies involved you getting on a plane on Sunday night or Monday morning and flying to the location, staying in a hotel, and working with that team or company until Thursday when you fly home. In fact, let me know in the comments if you're interested in this sort of thing. I've actually reserved the domain name a few years ago. Just like Monday to Thursday.com, m-th.com. I'd never done anything with it, but it's one of those things where it's an option that I have of kind of telling some of the on the road stories because I did it for so many years. But that's what you tend to face in those kind of scenarios. Some independent consultants will find that too. It really depends on the way you market yourself and things like that. But the main differences there tend to be that as an employee contractor, or sorry, I keep saying that, as an employee consultant, you are all your expenses tend to be covered by the company, and you're having to comply with their expense strategies and all this kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of things that go into that. But the nice thing about being an employee is that you're not covering all the expenses. You're getting all the benefits. In fact, a lot of these companies will actually give really generous stock options, and so it's absolutely something to consider from that regards. But you're not making as much money up front. You're not making the money. The hourly rates are not going to be as high for you as an employee. But it is an option to dip your toe in as far as what the consulting work looks like, with a lot less of the risk, and that's why I absolutely recommend that. That's something that I really didn't do at first, and I kind of regret not doing. It really would have shown me a lot of things more effectively. And so, as far as being an employee first, that's usually the best way to do it. Mostly because the best way to look at being an employee is that you're learning on someone else's dime, is the expression. So someone else is basically paying to educate you. You can learn a lot as a employee that can be either kept as an employee. I know a lot of people, for crying out loud, for the last 15 years, I've met so many people in what is now known as Citrix Consulting. It's been through some iterations, believe it or not. But so from the time I met some of these people, they were not actually Citrix Consulting. There was other things going on there, but they were, yeah, long story. But the reality is they're still employees to this day. So they're still part of Citrix. And it's because it works for them. They're kind of invested. They're vested in that. It's something where they enjoy being an employee and haven't really wanted to go independent. I've had that discussion with a great many of them, and they all feel that I'm perfectly happy with that. And you know what? That's okay. That's great. Always want to see people finding what's making them the happiest and what works for them. For a lot of people, they may want that out of the one part about that is the downfall of being an employee, and that is that you can't really say no. When you're given an assignment, you're going. that sort of thing. You might get vacation time and things like that, but as far as it goes, you can't be anywhere near as selective about the work you're doing. And there will sometimes be expectations of reviews and things like that you may not have as a contractor, and certainly not as an independent. So you might see things that are more corporate in those regards, and you might also be called to do things like support sales that you may or may not enjoy doing. So that's the downfall of being a employee as a consultant. But I will say, like I said, the as a way to learn, it's fantastic. I've watched people in multiple vendors bring on consultants from a variety of different backgrounds and basically bring them up to the level of being a full-on consultant within a matter of months. And so as far as rapid career advancement, that's actually a fantastic way to go about it. And if you've got the desire to leave your cubicle and go do that kind of work, then that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's not for everyone. Now, if you're like me and are well seasoned, and I'm not just talking the hairs on my chin here. I mean actually you've been at this for a long time, many, many years, you might find that being a contractor is actually a fairly good next step or a fit for you in general. I will say that being a contractor is simply where you are fulfilling a contract. So the customer that you're working with probably is not the end customer, and so there's probably layers in between. I have done many that are um, very much. Sorry, Slim Shady. Hey, brother, how's it going? So anyway, sorry. That's always fun to say things pop up and that sort of thing. So how's it going? Where was I? Yeah. As far as the uh, contractors side of this, a lot of times you will find that um, you're fulfilling multiple levels. So you'll see, okay, maybe the you're here and then you're filling a contract for someone that's maybe a staffing agency, for example, and that staffing agency is filling a contract for a vendor, and that vendor is actually fulfilling for the customer. And sometimes you'll see layers of that. And so the way that tends to work is that when you're contracting for that, you're not going to make as much money. But interestingly enough, what I'm finding is that even though each of those layers tend to take up about between 20 and 25% off the overall total. Remember what I said about being an employee, you're getting only half of basically what it is anyway, right? So your company's actually spending twice what you make anyway. And so at this basic level where they're billing the customer, they're billing at a certain rate, knowing that they need to fulfill a bunch of things up at the top level. And so everybody's getting a cut of that. So interestingly enough, even though you're not getting the full slice of the pie, in fact, a lot of times I'm getting more like a third of it. Consulting rates tend to be pretty high, and they tend to be high for this reason. It's just the reality of the business. A lot of people don't understand that. But if I'm making, let's say, 125 an hour here, there might be various rates that are going on these various levels going down to where the customer is actually paying more like $300 an hour. That is a reality of what we face. But here's the thing about doing, and this is why I actually have really enjoyed doing contract work above all others, and that is simply that I don't have to go out and find the work. I don't have to go out and do a marketing or relationship management, anything like that. I show up, I do the work, I leave. That's it. That's really as simple as it is, as that relationship is. And that, yeah. In fact, it's often mandated that that's as simple as that relationship is. I'm usually signing non-compete agreements and things like that that make it so that I can't approach that customer, even if I wanted to, oftentimes for several years. And so it works in the aggregate. So in other words, I can make myself available for multiple contracts at the same time, even depending on the contract, where I can fulfill multiple things at any given time. So in other words, and this is something I found out way too late in my life, by the way, but I could be sitting in a hotel room because my work on site is done, but I can be in a hotel room fulfilling another contract because that's available to me to work remotely. And so I can actually kind of double dip my time. And so it's worth more. So while I'm on the road, I might be billing the equivalent of 60 to 70 hours of work a week, and actually doing it, obviously. But at the same time, that means that I can spend more time off when I'm home, and so I can say no to contracts and say, no, I'm good for now. I'm just gonna go spend 2 months in New Zealand because I can. That's the beauty of this, is that you can actually have more flexibility to do that. And the reason why is because you have made yourself available to a company up here that is doing all the marketing and finding all the work for you. It's in their best interest to find you work because they might be getting, a good, 25% of that cut overall, but they don't have to do anything other than find you. It works really well. And so, so it works out that way. So in fact, the question was, how do you get clients as a contractor to work remotely? And and this is done a variety of different ways. A lot of times you can actually negotiate this up front. When you're in that phase of, they're saying they have some work. Hey, we have got some work for you. Can you do it? And you can say, you know what, I can do it, but I can only do it remotely. Is that okay? And they'll come back to the customer down the line and negotiate that for you. And there might be some different things as far as rates go. But really, the simple question is ask. Just ask the question. Especially now, it's a lot easier. And so I think for the next few years, it's going to be a lot easier to negotiate to be doing work remotely than it ever has been. And in fact, for me, I hate to say this, but given what's happening with air travel and things like that right now, if these things are going to be a trend, then I don't want to fly. I don't want to go through this, so I will make it a requirement to say, no, I only work remotely. I do not get on a plane. It's just a requirement for me. And that's, again, I have enough years and enough relationships and enough flexibility built into my life right now that I can do that. But what you're going to be finding is the more of us that are doing that, the easier it's going to be for you to say, okay, how can I do this remotely, or what kind of compromises can we make here? A contract that I've fulfilled, or actually just finishing up fulfilling, is one where I would only have to fly there once a month. And so I'd go there to visit the staff, make sure everything was good, keep up the relationships and that sort of thing. But the rest of the time I was remote. So only once a week, or sorry, one week out of the month was I actually going on site. And that was the compromise that we made as a result of this. As I would have said no if it was me going, literally across the country every single week. I would have said no, because I've been there, done that. And so it really is just asking and negotiating and saying, okay, what's going to work for both parties, and getting that in place. And so that really is the best way to do that. But yeah, just there's also when it comes to negotiating, there's a book that I'm trying to remember. I believe it was just called The Art. Well, no, Art of Negotiation. That was the Trump thing, but that's not what I'm talking about. It was actually by the Great Courses, and there was a course on how to negotiate that really helped me out a lot. And it really comes down to seeing what both parties want and trying to make a bridge between those two. So they want the work done. They're thinking that there's one way to do that. You're thinking there's another way to do this work, and I'd rather do it remotely. And you just get them to see the benefits of doing that sort of thing. It's like you could say things like, well, hey, if I'm on a plane, this is time I'm not available. I can't answer you on a plane. There's travel involved here. We're going to be losing hours of the week. And they might say, oh yeah, that's a good point. Let's go ahead and just do this remotely then, or maybe just make a compromise, like I said. And so negotiation really is you're trying to get the best for both sides and understanding both sides of the stories. There's always going to be certain contracting work that is not possible to do remotely. There's a lot of things that are in disconnected networks and that sort of thing, government contracts, that sort of thing, that have any kind of security clearance or things like that have to be done on site. They can't be done remotely. So sometimes there is those kind of things too. So you have to consider in your life, what kind of work do I want to do, and if it's only going to be remote work, because of things like, well, let's be honest with it. Right now, we're dealing with families that are having to have their kids at home and things like that. So this might be a reality, and so you might not be able to do on-site work, and you have to make that saying, you know what, I'm sorry if this disqualifies me. What else can we do to work this out, sort of thing. So it really is about asking the question. Hope that is helpful to you as far as that goes. And as far as rates, it's a very similar thing with that. This is where there's a scarcity mentality out there with a lot of folks that think that if they're not on site, they shouldn't be charging as much. The work you're doing hasn't changed, so you're charging the same. I'll just say that just as plainly as I can, that if you're doing the same work, your rate doesn't change. Now, there's some things with doing independent and certain types of contract work where if you are building in travel costs to your rate, that might have to change a little bit. if you're not actually fulfilling the travel part of that. That's a more complicated topic, obviously, but there are companies out there, and I've worked in various different ways. In fact, that's something you can expect when you're doing work as a contractor rather than as an employee, and certainly as not as being an independent. But if you're doing it as a contractor, the people you're contracting with may have certain standards of how expenses are handled for travel, and so you might have to fit in with that as well. And so sometimes you'll find that you're having to negotiate with them just the same way you would with a customer as far as the work's being done. And it really is just finding that neutral ground. With one particular company that I've contracted with for several years, it ended up being a process of, I would say about 2 or 3 years of back and forth. No, it's probably more than that, more like 5, of back and forth with travel. And honestly, we just tried things until we figured out what worked best. And ultimately for me, what worked best was just taking on the risks for myself and saying, you know what, let's just get a flat rate for travel every time I go out with you. And sometimes it'll be more than I need, sometimes it'll be less than I need, but I'm just taking on the middle ground here, and I'm taking on the IRS implications and all that kind of stuff for the travel. But it made it easier for them. But ultimately, it's kind of one of those negotiation points, because with them, a lot of times with all these kind of companies, it's easier for them to say, as far as your travel expenses go, there might be government GSA rights that you stick to say, this is as far as you can go as being reimbursed and that sort of thing. And they don't know how to handle going above that. There are ways to do that, obviously, or you're taking that expense on yourself, and you're only being reimbursed up to a point. Some companies don't understand that, and how to do that. That's just a reality. But a lot of times it really is just those negotiating, what's going to work as far as travel expenses being included in that. Some independent consultants will actually just build everything in to their rate, and so that they're not having to pass along any kind of travel information to the client at all. Lately, that has actually been beneficial for a great many of them, and it's actually been something I've been benefiting from as well, in an odd sort of way. In that if the contracted rate is the contracted rate, and they're always taking on the travel expenses, it's on them to do that in the way that makes the most sense. Now, I will say, as a higher end consultant, you're not going to be stuck in like a Motel 6 when you're traveling. And if you are, then you're contracting with the wrong company, is what that amounts to. If you're, and this is kind of weird, but there's a scale I can kind of use sometimes to see where this is going to fall. But basically, if you can picture what the hourly rate is for that customer, and take that as an hour and put that as a night in a hotel, that's about the threshold a lot of the times. Now, that's not always true. Sometimes there's some government regulations and things like that they're sticking to, like I said. But generally speaking, you got to recognize your worth in these kind of things as well, and say, you know what, if I'm being there and you're making $300 an hour, or you're charging $300 an hour, it's probably okay to have a hotel room that's 130, 150 a night. I think we can handle that sort of thing. So, and let's see. So the question is, so great tips. Do you do cold calls, send emails, or receive referrals for work? I quit my full time to go full remote, and that's actually something that I was going to cover in a minute, but I'll go ahead and just cover it now. As far as finding work as a consultant, now what I do recommend is, well, like I said, if you can do the progression of working for a company as an employee first, and then as a contractor, and then go fully on independent, that's a good way to do it. But really, what you want to do is find people that will benefit from you working. And that means recruiting companies and things like that will benefit from you fulfilling a contract. And there's various ways to find that. I think I'm trying to find, back in my mind, many years ago, when I started, I think it was like monster.com or something like that. But basically, I just started looking for companies that were looking for these kind of things. And that's what I did. As I just found those companies that were um, needing to fulfill contracts. There's a language they use. And it's kind of weird to see this sometimes. You start recognizing when there's a posting on LinkedIn, for example, for a job, and you just recognize as, okay, this is not something that's not working for them. That's something that they're fulfilling. And a lot of times that can be something that is a great uh, start. Building up a network is way more effective than doing any kind of cold calls, emails, and things like that. And here's why. Your network works for you when you aren't working. Say that again. Your network works for you when you're not working, but also your network works for you while you're working. In other words, if people know the kind of work you're doing and they know the quality of work you're doing, they will, whenever they see an opportunity come up, mention you in that regards. And so I would say that I have looked for work. Let's see. I last looked for work in April of 2011. I can tell you that that's the exact time frame. Um, yeah, that's it. So beyond that point, it was all, either doing a lot of work with the same contracting company, which is what I ended up doing a lot of, or my reputation in the marketplace, um, serving people, being part of local groups and that sort of thing, was making me recommended to other places. So people were calling me. And so, like I said, I have had several jobs since then, obviously, both contract and full time, but I haven't looked for any of them. They all found me, and that's important. The problem with doing cold calls and emails and things like that is it may work in the moment and it may not. And it's an interesting place to start, but it's not something to do as a regular thing. And here's why. People aren't always looking for work. We are becoming, like I said, much more project based in the way we do things. And so if we're project based, that's a very small point in time. And so if you're not hitting that point in time just right, then the likelihood of you being finding work that way is actually pretty low. And so it's actually not worth your effort. It's actually much better to do um, uh, you know networking, spend your time networking instead of just doing like cold calls and sending emails to places like that. Now there are certain places, whether it be a vendors or to even some of those well, I'm blanking on the name of some of these places that fulfill technical contracts like this. I want to say like tech systems and things like that can be a good starting point. Now, as a caveat, you will not make as much money doing that, but you could make enough to start this process of networking. And so you're actually making money while you're networking. Obviously, there's some things you want to do there. You want to make sure that you're very much above board and not doing things that are against the people you're working for. You always want everyone you work for to be really sad if you ever leave. That should always be your goal. Make people so satisfied with your work that they would just be really sad if you said no to them for the next time that comes around. That's the kind of thing that will get you noticed. Absolutely. But that's a much better way to go. But as far as starting off, just in the time we're in, it might be smartest just to go with a company like that is basically just going to have you on either as a part-time employee or a 1099 contract. A lot of these staffing agencies will actually bring you on as an employee just because of the risks involved with not doing a contract. But they can be negotiated with. Usually what I've had to do in those kind of situations is I formed a corporation, an actual S corp. So it's not just like an LLC or something like that. I had to have a website that demonstrated I took on multiple clients and things like that. There's a element of this. I'm probably getting too much into the weeds here, but as far as being an independent or a contractor with some of these companies, from the Department of Labor laws in the U.S. specifically, and a lot of places in the world, if you can't demonstrate that you are actually doing a transaction as corporate to corporate, then the Department of Labor can come after you as, you should have been having them as an employee, have taxes and that sort of thing. It's something I even am dealing with right now. That I've got some people that I'm bringing on as contractors where I need to figure this out as far as how to demonstrate that they're actually contractors and not that they should be employees. So now I'm on the side of that, which is kind of crazy, but that's my understanding is getting much better. So in other words, if you, like I said, if you understand what they're going through, you can much better negotiate a position for yourself. But honestly, with the way things are right now, it's very much an open field. There's a lot of possibilities out there. It's just a matter of finding the right one and finding the right time. And that's actually something that I was actually going to talk about here a little bit. Is should you hit the road? Should you work remotely? That sort of thing. And the answer really is it's kind of questions you have to ask for yourself. There's a lot of things out there that cause this. I would say number one is family. For me, my wife and I don't have kids. It's not in the plan, and so being on the road, taking advantage of that opportunity, it made it a lot easier. And I will be honest with you, if you are willing to travel, you have more opportunities than if you were only staying remote. Because you can, like I said, it's that part of that negotiation. You can actually, get that more effectively. What I'll also say is that it has been the traveling all over the world that has made me, or put me where I am today. That really is a key part of this, is that if you are able to do those face-to-face conversations, it adds something, and it actually is more valuable work. It's kind of ironic given that in end user computing, which is all remote technology for the most part, having to go on site to teach people how to support their staff remotely is ironic at best. But the reality is that that's where the connections are made. And so it's not about the work, it's about the connections. So if you can, it's worthwhile. But if you have family that you as a priority, then make your family a priority. Absolutely. I when my wife and I had these conversations about having kids, it was an absolute reality here, saying, okay, will we want to do this? And I said, well, if we have kids, I'm not going out on the road. They're going to be my life. And so I have to do that way. And the beauty is we're living in a world that lets us do that. And so you can absolutely be there for your family, be there for your kids, and still work remotely. It's very much a possibility right now. The other thing is you might have ailments that prevent you from traveling or things like that. So that obviously makes it kind of a remote being a better fit, and actually just better in general, especially right now. A lot of people that I know are very much immunocompromised. If they were forced to be out at an office or on the road right now, they would be in much higher risk of contracting the virus. So it makes sense for them to just have set up a life where they're working remotely because of their ailments. There's other people that I talk to that have a fear of travel. I think the story, I won't mention any names, and I doubt they'll see this, but I worked with a consultant that had a fear of traveling. I was on site with a consultant that had a fear of traveling. It was the darndest thing I ever seen in my life, but that was their thing. They drove to each location. They'd drive overnight to across the nation and that sort of thing to get to where they were going because they hated flying so much. And I was like, why are you out on the road? It doesn't make any sense. If you have and this sounds kind of weird, but if you have an aversion to like a social life kind of a thing, it seems like being on the road would be a good thing, and sometimes it is. But you have to make sure that you have your right interest in mind as far as that goes, because honestly, it's an important thing. So if it's social life, it can make it to where you're actually you can go into a bit of a depression on the road. In 2003, that's absolutely something that happened to me. I actually was finding that I needed more of a social life, and I was traveling so much at that time. At that time, I was doing the company it was called Kinko's back in the day. Now it's a FedEx office, but I was on the road constantly. I was not home And so if I was home, it was only for a couple of days on the weekend or whatever. And so it was really kind of brutal for me from a social perspective. And so um, that was the other side of that coin where I needed to take some time off, and I did. I said I need to be at home for a while just to rebuild my social life. Um, yeah. So it's a reality you need to face too. Is like, where is your level of tolerance for that kind of work, and make sure you're making the right fit there. Um, a lot of people have a desire to see new places, and what better way to do that than let somebody else pay for it? And so when it comes to that, gosh, you can't see it because it's above here in my office here, but I have some pictures that I took from my trip to Brazil. So I had a all expenses paid trip to Brazil for month and a half, 2 months, something like that. Was that contract? I didn't have to pay for that travel. In fact, I got a lot of status with United that year. Actually, I went to New Zealand. Sorry, yeah, Australia and New Zealand that winter on points, which is kind of fun. But all things like that. So there's benefits there for actually traveling. But honestly, just whatever is the best fit for you is what you need to do with that, and determining that. Um, so let's talk about some of the pitfalls of being a consultant. Um, First of all, being a consultant, like I was kind of mentioning, can be a bit of a lonely thing. If you are somebody that works better in a consistent team, what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times when you're a consultant, you'll be working as part of a team, but you may not be with the same team even within the next week. Especially if you're a independent contractor, you may not work with the team at all. You may be the team. If you are a contractor, you might occasionally work with the same people, but the odds of you working with the same people again is actually really low. As an employee, the odds are better, but not perfect. So the odds of you working with the same folks week after week are pretty low. Also with the clients, so the people you're serving, that's going to change and cycle through. Now, me, I'm the kind of person where that actually works out really well. I don't know, I'm just wired that way, where it actually, I disarm people more rapidly. It's easier for me to adapt to new social situations and things like that to a degree. So when I put myself in that zone anyway, and so it's actually really easy for me to show up on Monday morning, and by Tuesday, we're all laughing like we all knew each other for weeks. It's easy for me to do that. I've developed those kind of aspects of my personality and my skill sets to do that. But that's not for everybody. A lot of times, I talk to a lot of folks that they're much better off being part of a team long term. In other words, they want to know that somebody has their back. Uh, when you are out as a consultant, nobody has your back. Not really. You might have things that are uh, strategies and risk avoidance kind of things that are helping, but honestly, you're much more out there. You're not shielded by a whole team of people most of the time. You can't. A sick day is a bigger thing if you're a consultant. It's not impossible, but it's a bigger thing. It's a bigger thing than if you were part of a team. And so if you are a person that really thrives as a team player, consider just staying as an employee and finding ways to be happy as an employee, because that's the reality of being a consultant, is that you might find yourself in that situation where you are less of a team. I mentioned financials, and this is something where when people ask me in advance what to do as far as considering, axing their job or whatever, and I'm sorry for this in advance, but I always want to see people have at least 6 months of income saved up before they make that leap. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. One is it keeps you from that desperation play. It keeps you from doing things that you're taking work that you shouldn't take, or doing things like that aren't compatible. And so that's a tragic thing, and I'm sad that happens to folks. But honestly, making sure you have, at least 3, but more preferably 6 months of expenses. This is especially true if you go either independent or as a contractor, and here's why. And this is I'm saying this from very, very painful experience that my wife and I were actually just talking about the other day. In 2011, when I started working as a contractor and then as the bench with Citrix Consulting, what I found was, first of all, I was having to put expenses on a credit card. We were just trying to get out of debt at that time, and so we didn't have a lot of savings. We had like maybe $1,000 in savings, very much in the Dave Ramsey program. But what I found very quickly is that I had several $1,000s worth of debts that I was accumulating because of travel. This is nothing unusual for me. I'd done this before, but these things stack up. On average, depending on the contract, if you're traveling, you can just say that you're probably going to spend no less than $1,500 these days. There might be some in recent months. There might be some leeway there with people being much more competitive with pricing because of COVID. But the reality is that I was probably averaging between $1,500 to $1,800 a week in expenses. There were times where I was making less as what I was bringing in than what I was spending at expenses to be on site at places, which is kind of crazy, but sometimes it works out that way. So if you don't have that much in savings, you can get hit really hard with interest and things like that. And it's just a mental thing where it weighs on you heavily. Well, here's the problem. A lot of times you'll have spent the money. Maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks later, you'll get to the expenses. With some companies, your expenses on the first of the month can't be submitted until the last day of the month or the first day of the next month. That is a reality with a lot of companies, and in fact, I work with 2 of those right now. I just have to be aware of that and ready for that. But that means that there's that period of time of getting that reimbursement just from that, but add to that the length of time that it takes for the reimbursement to be processed and approved and sent out to you. A lot of companies that I've worked with will say it's 45 days from the time where they get that, and so they can process everything properly and everything like that. So there's been times where I will have a good 2 months or more, a lot of times even more, before I actually get reimbursed for expenses. And so that's sitting on my credit card for that whole time, getting interest and all that kind of stuff. And remember, I'm talking about like $1,500 a week. It gets worse. A lot of times when you are a contractor, there's a delay in getting paid for your services as well. Industry standard tends to be about 30 to 45 days. Depends on what you negotiate or what their policies are. A lot of companies that I've been working for lately are much better about this, where they'll process payment almost immediately, within 2 weeks of receiving my invoice. But that is something where you have to consider that into your calculations as well. And so if you don't have that much in savings, that means you're putting on credit card and things like that, and you're living off of money you don't have, which is not a comfortable thing. And it's something that causes a lot of stress, and it causes you to make bad decisions. So that is absolutely a pitfall if you're looking to go into either as a contractor or definitely as an independent. You want to make sure you have at least 6 months of your expenses in the bank so that you can keep those separate and make it so that you can take on the risk elsewhere and not be risking your family's well-being while you're out on the road making money. Now that comes around. Trust me, it's like there's a graph I have from 2011 to 2012 where there was this downward trend, and it just fell down below zero so fast. Before we knew it, we were $60,000 in debt, which is terrifying. That's just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But eventually it came back up, and then it climbed from there. But it took a good 9 months to be back into the red again. Sorry, into the black again. In other words, past the point of being at zero. And so that's something absolutely you want to consider, is that you want to make sure you're covered for that and don't make the same mistake I made if you can. It's not always a possibility. The reason for me was that I was let go from a contract that I thought was going to stay on longer. And so I was foolishly thinking that I had more of a sure thing than I did. And so that's why I didn't have the amount of savings that I should have had. And so I got caught in my own stupidity in that regards. There's a level of, you shouldn't be trusting people beyond what they're trustworthy for. And so words don't really matter as far as that goes. Sometimes even in writing doesn't really matter because there's escape clauses and things like that you need to be aware of. So make sure you're covering yourself before you take these kind of risks. It's very important. Now, if you're an independent consultant, or you're independent, meaning that you're getting your own clients, that you're attracting your own clients, things like that, you're going to have a lot of expenses from accounting, from marketing, advertising, from just logistics. All those kind of things are going to stack up really fast. And so I usually recommend between 9 months to a year of expenses being saved up if you go fully independent. It's actually been something where I have not gone fully independent. Largely for that reason. I do have independent contracts that I fulfill, but the question is if that's, I think you're asking if that coming from my blog, as far as and maybe if you can clarify that, what you're asking about specifically there about the blog, but if you mean that the contracts are coming from the blog, sometimes that actually that has happened, where they'll come from that, or actually had a contract that came, actually two contracts that came out of my participation in a book project called the Bite-Sized project. And so that was something that the work came out of that even. So contributions to the community and things like that. I would say tracing a stream of stuff usually happens pretty well, but to the point where I had to kind of make it very prominent on my LinkedIn profile that I'm not accepting new work. That's a good position to be in, to where, things point people towards your LinkedIn profile, things like that. So serving people to that level where they're wanting to have you and they're looking for you is really good. So, but as an independent, that becomes really crucial. That's something I always advise people in that regards, is that if you're going to be an independent consultant and find work outside of other channels, then you either need to be really good at marketing and selling. You need to be really committed to marketing within an area, which is actually where majority of independent consultants do their work, is within a geographic area where they can actually have relationships with people and that sort of thing. But you need to be very much front of mind with people. And so that means serving and networking at a much higher level than you might be prepared to do. So you have to set aside, in fact, my guidance with that typically is that at least 20% of your time needs to be spent in serving other people for free. Whether that means blogging, doing things like this, whatever it is, you need to be spending that time to be front of mind with people, and especially reminding them how you can serve them and that sort of thing. So that's a big thing. But as far as other pitfalls with that, is that yes, if you're independent, then you may not have yes you may not have the ability to do that up front. You may find a longer runway. And so that's why, as far as it goes independent, that's why I always recommend that people have an established kind of network and established work before you make that leap. It's really important. And yes, there is a 30-second delay. Actually, I believe my delay today was 42 seconds, actually, before your messages reach me and before I can, an even longer delay before I put it up on screen, that sort of thing. So mental processing and that sort of thing. So yeah, it is kind of a frustrating thing about YouTube Live these days, is that there's a substantial delay because there's so much buffering that needs to happen and things like that. And so yeah, unfortunately, that's just the way it is right now. Anyway, so yeah, I hope that's been helpful for you. If you have any questions about that sort of thing, I do offer coaching on occasion when I have the time anyway. There's complimentary sessions that I do with folks just to help out. You can message me directly or just DJ at, actually, sorry, for the coaching, you want to do coach DJ at ctxpro.com for coaching. So that's where to do that. So really quick, wanted to mention that the link, if you want to share our YouTube channel with a friend, this is a big long thing you can copy up there, or you can just share thrive-it.com/YT. That's just a shortcut that goes right to the YouTube channel. And there's another link you could do if you are confident they'll want to subscribe right away. You can replace the YT with sub now, and you can do that. So we do want people to join us live as much as possible. There's also a survey we have. We're looking at a possibility of doing a virtual summit ourselves. Have been looking at this for almost a year now, and I think it's finally time to take some action. And so thrive-it.com/survey to find that one. And that is a cool thing as well. Now, I did want to announce that there is, my book project is finally going forward. And so the book is called Just Do This, A Simpler Way to Succeed in IT. This is where I lay out my strategies that I've been honing for the last 20 years in terms of the soft skills you need to succeed in IT. This is how to run projects properly, how to work within a team, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a company, a team, all these kind of things. I've seen all the strategies. I've determined that these are the things that work the most consistently, the most often. And so what I've done is I've taken them into a format that works much more simply and much more easy to understand. It's not some big, complicated agile process that's not agile, or a DevOps thing that, for people that aren't even in development. This is how to do professional IT projects the right way, regardless of the way your team runs. It's going to be used in sales, clear down to consulting work very easily, and it's 4 different phases. And so you have the first phase, which is understand; second phase, which is plan; third is change; and then you maintain. And that's how IT projects really do run. And so I've just made that more simple, and each section has details as to what to expect with that and that sort of thing. But the thing I'm happy to announce is that the very first book will go on to Amazon Sunday, hopefully. But look for it on the Amazon Kindle store. It's called Just Do This. Look for that this Sunday. The way this is going to work is we're going to do all 4 parts, each one as their own Kindle ebook. There's a bunch of reasons we're doing that. Mostly, I just didn't want to wait getting this out to you guys. We're still working on some of the stuff with the print edition, but this allows me to get it out there in front of you. And if you want it on Kindle, it's going to be a 4-part series. We're going to release a new book of the series every week. And so we'll start this week with the Understand book, next week with the Plan, the week after that with Change, and the week after that with Maintain. There are some bonuses you can sign up for. If you go, there's a link inside the book. I'll just put it that way. And so I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be a lot of fun to release a second book within a same year, which is crazy, but that's what happens when you stack a bunch of projects up all at the same time. So I appreciate your time on that, and I definitely hope you enjoy that. The print edition, see if I got my date right on this. The print edition should be released on August 16th worldwide. So there's some logistics that we still need to work out with that. I'm hoping to have a audiobook done by that time as well, but we'll see how things go. Obviously, it's a very busy season for me, so we'll see if I can actually squeeze in recording an audiobook as well, but I definitely hope to. I definitely will at some point, no matter what, but I'm hoping to get it in front of that release as well, so we can just release all 3 all at the same time. So it's all self-published, which is always, a lot of fun, but when I say fun, I mean it's kind of torturous. You're taking on all the risk and hoping for the best, but you're all in control of the process as well, which is something I do enjoy. So that will be coming to your way. We're also going to hopefully be putting together some course material with this as well, at least a basics course that'll be included as a bonus with the book, but also a more in-depth course that can be done as a seminar, as a self-paced course, or as a attended course as well. So we're looking at some possibilities with that, working with my assistant and I to get this going for you guys. So looking forward to that. So honestly, yeah. So hopefully next week we'll have everyone back with us. Unfortunately, like I said, it's the world we're living in. Sometimes things happen, and you can't control it too much. But everybody's staying healthy out there, and I hope you're doing the same. And we will see you hopefully again next week for another THRIVEcast. Cheers, everybody.